The Roman Empire was fine-tuned to spread Christianity. Some might even say Christianity needed Rome to survive at all. It was Rome's absolute dominance of the ancient world that allowed Christianity to flourish. When Christ was born in Bethlehem, there was already a figure who was known as a great peacemaker and the Son of God living at the time. Augustus Caesar, the man who ended the Roman Civil War and jump-started the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was the emperor. Sometimes called Divi Filius, or Son of God, due to his adoption by the now deified Julius Caesar, Augustus's fate couldn't be more juxtaposed to that of the humble Christ figure who would one day claim similar titles. The dichotomy is striking. Thus we see a tension from the very beginning between Christianity and the Roman Empire, one that foreshadowed the persecution that Rome became infamous for in the Christian mythos. Paradoxically, though, Rome had a part to play in Christianity's survival and spread. To understand why the Roman Empire was so fundamental in helping Christianity spread, we first need to understand the geopolitical reality of the 1st and 2nd century Mediterranean. Rome's control of this region created a lasting peace previously thought unimaginable. The Pax Romana is the period of Roman history spanning roughly 200 years, from the accession of Augustus in 27 BC after years of civil war, to the death of Marcus Aurelius, last of the 5 good emperors, in 180 AD. Rome reached its greatest extent during this period, and its population reached an estimated 70 million people, nearly a third of the world's population. Considered a golden age of Roman imperialism, it solidified Rome's hegemonic power, ensuring a relative peace and order in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Trade boomed as Rome's intricate road networks provided safe and easy travel for merchants, and Roman culture reached its climax. Life was good under the Pax Romana. Architectural masterpieces like the Colosseum or Vespasian's Temple of Peace were constructed, Rome's borders were secured by defensive achievements like Hadrian's Wall, and poets like Horace and Virgil penned their masterpieces. Gibbon wrote in his work, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that it was this historic period where the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous. He claimed it was a series of great emperors that solidified Rome's prosperity. The vast extent of the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power, under the guidance of virtue and wisdom. The armies were restrained by the firm but gentle hand of 4 successive emperors, whose character and authority commanded involuntary respect. The forms of the civil administration were carefully preserved by Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus, who delighted in the image of liberty and were pleased with considering themselves as the accountable ministers of the laws. This triumph of the Roman state coincided surprisingly with an incredible growth in Christianity. Within a mere 10 years of Jesus' death, conversions were taking place in Jerusalem, Antioch, Corinth, Alexandria, and Rome. Over 40 churches were established by the year 100. By 300, Christians accounted for approximately 10% of the entire Roman population, and within about 50 years, they'd be the majority religion in the empire. So how did Roman imperial dominance contribute to the spread of Christianity? The Romans were pagans, and they helped kill Christ in the first place, right? Well, first, when one power stabilizes an entire region, travel becomes easier, including for missionaries. With the entirety of the Mediterranean region under a single jurisdiction, a feat not replicated before or since, travel that would have previously been impossible became accessible to Roman citizens without fear of violence or banditry. As mentioned earlier, this greatly benefited merchant trade, but it also helped ideas spread further and faster than ever before. Roman roads carried not just resources and soldiers, but philosophies and religions, including the gospel. One need only look at St. Paul's odyssey across various Mediterranean cities to understand how Rome's grip on the region benefited early Christian missionary work. The fact that he never needed to cross national boundaries simplified his travels and ensured relative safety. His sea voyages especially highlight the unique situation of Rome at the time, as the entire Mediterranean, often called a Roman lake, was completely encircled by the empire. Rome's mighty fleets kept the waters safe from pirates and foreign powers. Even on land, Paul's journeys to Judea, Syria, Anatolia, and Greece kept him within the bounds of the empire. Before Roman domination, these regions were controlled by various hostile powers that would have made traveling between them tough. Glancing at a map of the ancient Eastern Mediterranean roughly 200 years before Rome fully controlled the region, the pathway of St. Paul's journey would have crossed the Ptolemaic, Seleucid, and Antigonid powers who were often hostile to each other. For example, the Syrian wars between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, as well as conflicts in Greece between the Antigonids and the Achaean and Aetolian leagues during the same time would have made peaceful travel extremely difficult. But the peace and security provided by Roman hegemony meant people and ideas could spread with ease. This no doubt helped Christianity spread in an era where people weren't preoccupied with their immediate security. Paul's journey also highlights a second factor that allowed Christianity to flourish: the incredible infrastructure of Rome at the time. In particular, Rome's road system was the most advanced in the ancient world and made traveling efficient. As one 4th century surveyor described the extent of the highway system, "There is hardly a district to which we might expect a Roman official to be sent, on service either civil or military, where we do not find roads. They reach the wall in Britain, run along the Ribe, the Danube, and the Euphrates, and cover, as with a network, the interior provinces of the empire." It's estimated there were over 50,000 miles of paved roads throughout the empire at its peak. These arteries provided efficient means of travel for Rome's armies, officials, resources, and missionaries like St. Paul. Another factor that helped Christianity spread within the Roman Empire was the Roman family structure. An extremely hierarchical system, the Roman family revolved around the decisions of the pater familias. The pater familias, Latin for father of the family, was head of the family. The oldest male relative occupied the position and had legal authority to exercise complete control over anyone in his household, including his wife and children, adopted relatives, clients, and slaves. Though mainly a legal title pertaining to the economic and juridical aspects of an estate, it also had massive cultural implications. In the case of Christian conversion, an entire family would often follow the faith of the paterfamilias if he converted first. New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman writes in his work, Inside the Conversion Tactics of the Early Christian Church, "In the Roman world, converting one person often meant converting the whole household. If the head of the household was converted, he decided the religion of his wife, children, and slaves." This reality is attested to in the Bible. In the book of Acts, the centurion Cornelius sends his servants to the apostle Peter to hear his testimony after receiving a vision which instructs him, "Send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter. He will bring you a message through which you and all your household will be saved." After bringing Peter into his home, Cornelius converts along with his entire family, showing how conversion was not always a merely personal decision, but also a familial one. The account is often used to highlight the early church's ministry to non-Jews, as Cornelius is the first Gentile to be converted. However, it also showcases the logistics involved in conversion. It was often family by family rather than person by person. Another major factor that allowed Christianity to spread throughout the Roman Empire was the general Roman attitude toward competing religions. Unlike today, Romans did not view faith as exclusive and took a laissez-faire approach to new religions. Since pagans worshipped many gods, there was no particular obligation to be exclusive to any of them. For example, if someone had a devotion to, say, Apollo, that didn't mean they couldn't have a devotion to a different god, like Zeus, as well. And during the Pax Romana, the Mediterranean world was a cornucopia of exotic foreign cults that existed alongside the traditional pantheon of Roman gods. As the empire grew, it simply welcomed new gods and goddesses into the fold. The cult of Isis became popular once Egypt came under Roman control, and Mithraism, an Eastern religion that worshipped the god Mithras, spread during the same period as Christianity in the 1st to 4th centuries AD. This religious syncretism allowed Christianity to go somewhat undetected initially, as Romans didn't necessarily see it as a threat to their beliefs. Rather, the Christian god was just one of many that a citizen could choose from. But antithetical to paganism, Christianity did impose exclusivity on its followers. Any Roman that joined it had to give up their old gods, which meant that in the long run Christianity grew as paganism declined. Every Christian converted was a loss for paganism. But what about persecution? Seems like the Romans weren't actually always tolerant of new religions. And wasn't the threat of imprisonment and execution a major deterrent for the early church? Well, many scholars agree that early on, Roman persecution of Christians was sporadic and localized. Nero in 64 AD spearheaded the first large-scale persecution after Rome burned, but even then it was probably only targeted at the Christians in the city and not the entire empire. It wasn't until roughly 250 AD that Christians were widely persecuted under the reign of Decius. So Christianity had over 2.5 centuries to incubate and strengthen in numbers before Decius's intense state-sponsored persecutions. And by that time, Christians already accounted for a sizable portion of the populace. The next 4 decades after Decius are sometimes referred to as the little piece of the church, as Christianity flourished relatively uninterrupted until Diocletian launched the final and great persecution of the church in 303. But even this did not last long. Constantine's Edict of Milan, which officially legalized the religion, came only a decade later. Christianity at this point was already growing so rapidly, it had become an unstoppable force. We can see that Rome's dominance of the Mediterranean, intricate road systems, family structure, and initial ambivalence toward new religions helped Christianity grow. It might be a stretch, but it's possible Christianity would have never survived at all in a different time and place. Medieval Christians actually acknowledged this fact. They believed pagan Rome paved the way for Christianity in some respects. For example, Julius Caesar's inclusion in the Nine Worthies, who were seen as exemplars of chivalry, hints at the acknowledgement of Rome's role in the development of Christianity. He did, after all, jumpstart the events that led to the empire's founding in the first place. The medieval conception of history was that of a grand Christian tale, a belief that all of history was God's unraveling plan for humanity's salvation. When one looks at the unique circumstances around the Roman Empire and how it seemed almost fine-tuned to facilitate the spread of Christianity, it's hard to argue with them. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like more, please like and subscribe, and consider joining our Substack community to join our mission of highlighting the truth and beauty of Western civilization. Catch you next time.